Good evening. Biochar is, in my opinion, the technology that is most well positioned to help us address global climate change. Global climate change is the great work of our time. For myself, the millennial generation, and all the generations to come after us, this is going to be the largest, most imminent threat to the stability of our human civilization. So, we need to do something to address the greenhouse gases and the process of desertification that are creating climate change. Biochar is important because it is intricately linked to four very pivotal aspects of our economy, and as such can very readily be integrated into our different economic activities to make a lasting impact on mitigating climate change, on sequestering carbon dioxide. Now, we look at organic waste, waste management. All of our organic wastes are composed in, to some extent or another, of carbon. All organic matter is carbon based ultimately. So when we go through the process of pyrolysis, which is what creates biochar or charcoal, the interchangeable, they're virtually the same thing. We have as a direct output energy. Process of creating biochar creates energy. That energy can be harvested. It can be distilled into biodiesel. It can be captured as compressed natural gas, or it can be harnessed during the pyrolysis process to create radiant heat that you can use to warm water for warming a greenhouse, that you can use to warm a living space, or that you can use to generate electricity, put it into a battery, or put it into the grid. So, energy is obviously very important to us. We are finding more and more and more complicated and complex ways to use energy. There will never be uh, an excess of energy. So there's one fundamental aspect of our economy. Soil enhancement, arguably more important than energy because soil is the world's most underappreciated and underrated natural resource. Soil is the cornerstone of human civilizations, and the rise and fall of human civilizations throughout history has been a long, uh, brutal story of empires destroying that which made them great, that being their soil, because it allowed them to raise crops. Now, biochar is recalcitrant carbon, and the process of creating biochar leaves carbon with a lot of microscopic pores, holes, crevices, crenellations in it. So it becomes the ideal medium for holding water, for holding nutrients, for holding the microorganisms, the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes that feed the plants that we need to eat, that we need to feed to our animals. Biochar is basically the I've heard Elaine Ingham describe it as, uh, you know, high density apartment housing for the soup of microbial life that supports the soil ecosystem. So it is the infrastructure for building more soil carbon on top of it. So the biochar that we put into the soil today continues to hold more and more carbon on top of its legacy load into the future as it grows plants, as it stores water, as it stores nutrients. Now, when you pyrolyze your wastes and you produce char, that char becomes recalcitrant, would have already used, and by being recalcitrant, it is ultimately removed for our intents and purposes from the carbon cycle. It is stiff, hard uh, carbon that will take thousands and thousands of years to degrade and become CO2 again. So, by taking carbon out of the atmosphere more or less permanently, we take a step in the right direction of addressing the climate change problem because the predominant greenhouse gas that is pushing the atmosphere out of control is carbon dioxide. Now, the background of biochar and what we know of it, it it came from Brazil. You know, this is where we observed the most impressive uses of biochar, and in fact, the terra preta sites, as they're called, where large biochar deposits were found, were actually also evidence of a long lost human civilization. If you read the book 1491, which I highly recommend, it's a beautiful history book that really sheds important insights into the civilizations of the Native Americans and really dispels a lot of the Eurocentric myths about how America was this empty paradise waiting for people from the old world to colonize it. But in 1491, these terra preta sites and other large geoglyphs are presented as evidence that the first explorer to the Amazon, his name was Orehala, I believe, I might be pronouncing that wrong, uh, his account, which at the time was seen as fantastical and mythical, of there being huge civilizations and hundreds of thousands of people in the Amazon basin, was actually true. And these terra preta sites are their landfills. So what these pre-Columbian Amazonian societies did was they would find a place where they would discard their waste materials, even their broken pottery shards, and then they would light a fire at the top and they would cover it with dirt. And that's how they would create these rich, dark soils on the right. And this is, again, primarily composed of biochar from hundreds and hundreds of years of people living in the Amazon, you know, piling all their waste and pyrolyzing their waste. And you can see the difference in how the corn plant responds to this char. On the left is the typical Amazonian soil, which is extremely poor. It's highly degraded and weathered by rain because the Amazon gets hundreds of inches of rain a year. And all the nutrients are leached out by the rain, and all that remains is this, you know, pH 4, pH 5, acidic, depleted soil. But the biochar soil is rich, it's vibrant, it's full of carbon, it's supporting all kinds of soil microbial life that are actively cycling nutrients for the plants to uptake them. And after hundreds of years of their original caretakers, those large societies, being extincted by European diseases, they are still growing fantastic plants. So this is the biochar itself. Like I said, biochar, charcoal, virtually the same thing. Only difference is that biochar is conditioned to support microbial life, to store nutrients, to store water. Usually, after it comes right out of a pit like this, you take that biochar or that charcoal and you put it into a compost pile and you turn it and you turn it and it's inoculated, and then you're ready to use it in the garden because raw biochar acts as a sponge. You could think of carbon as really being good at holding nutrients. Well, if it's completely empty and it's completely uncharged, it's going to suck all the nutrients out of your soil. So again, you produce charcoal from a system of pyrolysis. This picture of a match really goes to show what's going on when you light organic materials on fire. The combustion front is way up here, way up here. So the heat from the combustion front causes your organic material, in this case it's wood of the match, to sweat out different volatile gases. That's what the pyrolysis front here is. Now the combustion front, combustion uses oxygen, is taking all the oxygen in this general area and burning it up. So down here below where the combustion is, where the pyrolysis is happening, there's no oxygen. Because there's no oxygen, what's going on here isn't being combusted. Instead, the heat is causing the gasification, the sweating of volatile gases within the wood to go up to where the combustion front is happening, and you're producing charcoal. Now, if you let all of the gases evaporate out of this wood and the combustion front advances down, that's when you'll have combustion of your charcoal, and this will turn into white ash as the carbon that you were hoping to save in a recalcitrant form, in a black carbon form, uh, also gets burned up and volatilized as CO2, and all you're left is white potash. So this is, a more technical flow chart showing biomass liquefaction via pyrolysis. You pyrolyze, you're left with char, and then those vapors is ultimately what produces the energy yield from that first quadruple Venn diagram in this presentation. And you see the different options of what happens here. What these gases are, they're different hydrocarbons, different chain length hydrocarbons that can be combusted for heat. They can be condensed out to be stored as liquid fuels, or they can be converted to hydrogen, basically compressed natural gas. This picture is another illustration of the match, but on a larger scale, and this also goes to show how to properly light a large bonfire. This picture on the left was lit from the top. Because it was lit from the top, the combustion front was up at the top, and the heat of that combustion is extracting the gases from the wood at the bottom, and it is burning those gases up at the top. And if this picture were zoomed out a little more, you'd see above this large ghost-like combustion, there's very little to no smoke. On the other hand, the picture on the right is someone who lit a fire from the bottom, and because that fire is coming from the bottom, it's causing all of the gas from the wood at the top to sweat out and come off as smoke. So you see the char forming in this the burn pile on the left, and managing this burn pile so that you get an appropriate amount of char will basically be judging when to quench this, and you'll be able to judge that when the char starts to turn white, starts to turn to ash. You see this in this picture. Now this is producing char in a more old-fashioned way in a kiln. You dig out this kiln to help restrict the flow of air into it, and it also causes a toroidal effect where the air, because it has to flow over the lip and down in, will kind of form a vortex that will enhance the pyrolysis reaction. So you see some char that the person made here in the middle picture, and on the left is the actual process of making the char in this pit. And you can see where there's white, everywhere where there's these little spots of white in the pyrolysis or in the kiln. That's where the combustion front of the heat reaction has actually advanced into your char, and you're experiencing some loss because you're seeing your char start to burn up and leave behind potash, which is what you don't want. You want as much char as you can. You want to harvest this recalcitrant carbon, put it into the soil, lock it away from the atmosphere for forever. So, this is just my basic overview of biochar, why it's useful, why it's important. This is going to be the first in a series of videos I want to make about important carbon negative technologies. As I already said in the introduction, addressing climate change is going to be the most important work that we have to do, and by integrating and utilizing these different carbon negative technologies, we can really start to make a difference in what happens to our atmosphere, because we all have our dollars, we all vote with our dollars. So if we support these technologies, we buy into them, we utilize the charcoal, the biochar, we'll have more productive gardens, but we'll also have a better regulated atmosphere. Uh, my hope is just that by spreading this information, more people can take these ideas in, run with them, utilize them, and we can have a carbon negative future. This is all I have to say on this topic for now. Thanks for watching. West Coast.